Hello, good evening, everyone. We have a nice intimate group tonight, and we're excited that you've joined us to learn about navigating the IEP process in Jewish day schools. So to start, I'm Sharon Goldstein, and I'm the Director of Day School Programs at Gateways. We partner with most of the Jewish day schools in the greater Boston area. And we partner in a whole bunch of different ways. But as it relates to this, we bring in, based on the school's needs and above and beyond what they can provide, we bring in speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, learning specialists. We have a behavior consultant. We do reading support, math support. And so a number of the Jewish day schools contract with us to provide these services. I'm also going to get into it as we go through this webinar, some ways that we partner with some of the public school districts in order to provide some services. And we're also able to provide services even if someone is not on an IEP as well. And then separate from that, we bring a bunch of different initiatives into the schools. We're doing some mental health work. We do some peer disability awareness work, just to name a few. And I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Karen, who will introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Sharon. Hi, my name is Karen Samet, and I'm glad that we can have this partnership tonight, this presentation tonight. I am one of two family advocates with Disability Lifespan Solutions, which is a program at Jewish Family and Children's Services. I'm a former special education teacher myself for over 30 years, a teacher and administrator. And I've been with JF and CS in this role for the last 4 years. I call our program as part of a larger social service supports, disability supports in our agency, a program to provide research, advocacy, navigation, from the age of early intervention children, ages toddlers, up through the transition period in high school. And I support adults with disabilities all the way into their 60s and 70s. So we really provide supports for the entire lifespan. And Sharon had invited me to work with her so that we could take a look at my taking you through the IEP process and explaining from a public schools perspective, but hopefully being able to apply that to the Jewish day schools and fill in some gaps for you and provide you with that information.
Great. So next slide, Sarah.
I can talk to the agenda. So we've introduced ourselves. And tonight we want to give you a roadmap to navigate the IEP process. So we want to focus on engaging with the public schools, how to go about pursuing evaluations and assessments. And I don't know what it said as the third one there, but pursuing service, there we go. Pursuing services through gateways at your school. Okay. Okay. So I'm aware that parents attending tonight, that you might be sitting in and be in various places along this continuum of your knowledge, of your understanding of what is available for your child from the public school district, whether to be initially pursue identifying a special need, whether it's to consider what is available to support your child in the school setting at the day school, and how to go about navigating the IEP process. So I hope I can offer you some insights and a roadmap to navigating this process. Perhaps these questions that I have here that I pose will resonate with you. So have you ever been worried about your child's academic, developmental, or emotional progress? Has your child recently been given a diagnosis such as autism, an intellectual disability, or a learning disorder? Does your child have difficulty with any of the following? And this is just a smattering of examples: organization, time management, socialization, or going to school, attending school? Or does your child have an existing IEP or 504 plan that you are concerned might not be meeting their needs? So if you have answered yes to any of these questions, hopefully I can help you tonight. And hopefully this webinar will be a great first step in sharing of information. Okay, next slide here.
And
Okay,
Karen, just before you go on, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat so we can answer them as we go along. And we also will have a little bit of time at the end for any questions as well.
sure. Okay. So how do you go about, if you're in these early stages of having some questions about your child's skills and abilities, how do you identify and then confirm those concerns? So we encourage you to bring your concerns to your pediatrician, to contact your child's guidance counselor, or I believe the title in some of the day schools is director of support, or your child's teacher to discuss your concerns. And I'm aware that quite often you are the first one or the child's teacher to identify that there may be a concern. And for you, it could be something like your child isn't completing their homework. You may see an increase in frustration or disinterest, or seeming to struggle to complete a particular task at home. And in conversation with your child's teacher, he or she may bring up that they see some concerns in those areas as they play out in the school day. So the first step in this process, in this IEP process, is to request an evaluation through your home school district school. And this includes educational, psychological, and it could be speech and language, occupational therapy. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. And I understand that Gateways has a document to help you with this process. I don't know, Sharon, if you want to speak to it now or at a later point.
Sure, I can just mention that we have a document that really goes through the kind of steps of approaching the school. And we also have, as part of the document, links to pretty much every school district in Massachusetts that we know there are kids at Jewish day schools that they've come from. Because when you do go through the IEP process, you are doing this through the public school where you live. So the elementary school or middle or high school that your children would be going to if they weren't at a Jewish day school. And so we have links that go directly to those pages that kind of walk through the steps, because while it's mostly the same, it sometimes does vary a little bit district by district.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we have these little highlighted boxes here that remember that you are your child's #1 advocate. If you sense that there's something wrong, but a professional isn't necessarily concerned, keep advocating, keep pursuing your concerns. And the key to the beginning of this process is requesting a school evaluation. So what you want to do first is open your communication with the residing school district, approach the special ed administrator or the coordinator, and request a set of evaluations. Make sure that you check off, and it's usually a one-page document, make sure that you check off all the assessments that are possible with your concerns. So there will be an assessment for speech and language, communication, occupational therapy that deals with fine motor and gross motor. If those aren't the concerns, of course, you don't have to check those off. But the primary areas to indicate evaluation would be the psychological testing, and we'll talk more about that, academic testing, achievement testing in math, writing, and reading comprehension, a classroom observation, where someone from the residing school can come out and observe your child at their day school, as well as the psychological testing, which is going to look at learning style, working memory, auditory processing, visual processing, and a key issue that we see a lot of students that we address in special ed, executive functioning, the ability to organize, the ability to hold on to information and reapply it, all of those skills that deal with staying focused on task. So once you have filled out those forms or the form, that is handed over to the special ed person in the department, and that begins the process. There's actually a timeline, a continuum that the school has to meet in terms of a certain number of days that every task has to be completed with you involved in that process. So the evaluations themselves that you are requesting will be discussed at the team meeting that will take place within 45 days after the clock starts to give the evaluation. And at that team meeting, those assessments will be shared, and you do have 3 days before the meeting to be able to access those assessments. And that is where there will be a discussion about the results of the testing and whether or not eligibility for special needs services is possible. And I'll go into more detail about that. Okay.
Okay, great. And just because we've gotten a couple of questions about it, we are recording this, and we will send out the recording to the participants following this. And we will also it will be on the Gateway's website, and we're also going to share it with the Jewish Day Schools to be able to have on hand if anybody needs it, or if you have friends who you think might benefit from watching it. So why bother going through the IEP process if you're in a Jewish day school or private school? So for starters, it's just, if you have concerns, I think if we think back to the first slide that Karen spoke about, if you answered yes to any of those concerns, it's helpful to get an evaluation and to learn about how your child learns and learn and get information about their academic profile. And then you might be able to get some of these services actually in your Jewish day school. So when you go through an IEP process in your home district, you are, if you're eligible for services, you have a few options. So the first option is that you could go to that public school to get any of those services, any or all, I should say, of those services during the day. So that's always an option. However, it tends to not always be the most convenient option for parents and for students, because it often means what it does mean is leaving the day school to drive back to the public school for your services and go back. So you end up missing, a large amount of time for however much time your actual session is of services. And obviously for working parents, that's challenging as well. And then the other piece is that it's also not coordinated, with the teachers, and it's not really embedded with the curriculum and all that goes on in the day school. So what we're able to do is there is something called proportionate share funding. And this is funding that is federal funding that is designated specifically for students who are privately placed in schools. So anyone in any private school is eligible for some proportionate share funding. And that is anyone who has an IEP. So anybody who has an IEP in a particular school generates some funding. And that's how you get this whole pool of funding. And then the funding gets divvied up between the different private schools in that district. So what is interesting about the proportionate share funding, which is a little bit separate from the regular state funding that funds most of the IEP services, is that proportionate share funding actually goes by the district where your school is located. So while you might go and get your IEP where you live, if you live in a different town than where your school is, the proportionate share funding comes through that town. So it gets divided up amongst the students there. And I'll kind of go through this again a little bit later, but it's known as more of a group entitlement versus an IEP, which is an individual entitlement. And because it's a group entitlement, what it means is that you don't necessarily get, it doesn't necessarily equate exactly the services that are on your IEP that you would get all of them covered. So for starters, it usually is a smaller amount. It can't possibly cover all of the services on everyone's IEPs. And then from there, the district, in consultation with the private schools, make some determination to make it as equitable as possible to divvy it up amongst students who have IEPs in those schools. And what happens is that while you have an IEP from your local public school, when you get services through the proportionate share funding, it's done through what's called a service plan. And so a service plan is created, and that's how you get those services in the school. And so another reason, kind of just to go back to sort of why go through all of this process, is that it's also really important, if you do have needs, to start a paper trail. If for some reason at some point you transfer to a different school, if for some reason you end up going to the public schools at some point, it's always really helpful to have your IEP in place, because that follows with you. You're able to take that with you, and then there's really no gap in services because you can just kind of get started. Versus if you kind of wait and then you need to go through the whole process. And again, we will talk a little bit about that process. It's free to get evaluated. It is part of your right as a taxpayer in your town. So there's no cost to going through the IEP process. And I think so to one of the questions earlier, people also have the option to have some type of a private evaluation or neuropsychological evaluation. And again, I think we're going to speak a little bit more about that a little bit later. For proportionate share funding, it really does only cover IEPs, not private evaluations. So that's sort of, again, another reason that it's beneficial to go through the IEP process in that way. It is sometimes helpful if you do have a private evaluation. Some districts will let you bring it to them, and they might use it, and it'll help them do either less testing, or they will take it into consideration in terms of determining eligibility. So that can be a benefit too. And then another piece to the question earlier is, if you go through the IEP process in your home district, again, where the town that you live in, and you're either not happy with the evaluation, or your child was not found eligible, but you really do believe that your child should be eligible for services, you can ask the district that your school is in to do testing. And so they will go through the same testing. And while they can't generate an IEP, they can generate a service plan for you to be able to get some of the services. So that is always another option as well. I think we are ready to move on to the next one.
Yeah, so I want to talk about these independent evaluations, but I just learned something from Sharon that I hadn't before when we were preparing this, and that is that you can go back to your school system where you live and still negotiate some kind of support service plan that would be applicable for a day school. So that is an interesting option. But before I get into why would you pursue an independent evaluation, and Sharon talked about that, if you're not happy with the results, I just want to backtrack a little bit and talk about what how this works with the public school. So once you've given in this request, and as I said, there's a continuum timeline by which the public school has to meet. Your child will be evaluated. You have to negotiate bringing your child to the school to have the assessments done. The write-up has to happen by 30 days, and between those 30 days and 45 days is when, with those evaluations completed, the team, and you are part of that team, is then coming up with a date to meet. The evaluations are shared. It takes time to write them up, so that's why they are not produced until close to that 45th day. Once you're sitting down with all of these results, the eligibility determination is looking at the discrepancies in the testing between achievement and cognitive and psychological testing. They're looking at areas of weakness relative to strength. And there's a whole lot of assessing that is done that then leads to a potential diagnosis that would then lead to eligibility for special needs services. Also, and I'll talk about it later, is you might be found, that your child might be found to have a disability, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he or she isn't making effective progress in the classroom. And that's where the observation and the teacher reports from your child's school are going to matter. So there is, other than an IEP, and we'll talk about it later, is also developing a 504 accommodation plan, which is a federal document, which establishes that, yes, there's a disability, but there isn't a need based on the child's progress to provide specialized instruction, which is what an IEP is providing, specialized instruction. And rather, you're going the route of a 504 for your child, where the classroom teacher, and Sharon can speak to if it looks a little different at the day school than it does in a public school, your classroom teacher is providing accommodations to your child based on his or her disability, but there's no specialized instruction. And in fact, in the public school settings, the guidance counselors are the ones that monitor the 504s. But going back to evaluations, so you get the results of this testing, you have your meeting, or you get the results 3 days before, you're looking at these tests and you're saying, I don't think that either they did enough, or I don't think they pinpointed concerns that my son or daughter's teacher pointed out, or that we've been observing. And there is always the option to get an independent evaluation. Now, it is a little tricky because, Sharon, sometimes there are school systems that will say, we've done what we believe is an adequate amount of testing. And then it behooves the parent to pursue independent evaluation. And then you're looking at whether or not your health insurance can cover that. At this time, evaluations, independent evaluations, are anywhere between $5,000 and $6,000. And often the waiting lists are between 6 and 9 months to even get an appointment. Why would you want to do this independent evaluation? You're getting another opinion. You can help, it will help clarify the diagnosis that was given. And these results might push the school to add more to what they see are the goals for the goals and objectives for specialized instruction. So it's a very important tool, but there's a lot of reasons to do it or not do it based on your own family situation. Oh, one last thing. Let's say you started out by pursuing getting an independent evaluation first because you had some questions, and then you broach your school system. So the school has a responsibility to read it. If they want to, they can hold an IEP meeting and base decisions of eligibility off of that independent eval, or they may say, we want to conduct our own assessments. And then you go through the process of checking off for the assessments to be done. Okay, so moving along to what happens at that team meeting. There in the team meeting is the eligibility determination and the possibility that you're creating a proposed IEP or a 504. So when you leave that meeting, you're not handed a completed IEP document or 504, but all of the language and what you're talking about that would be included in that is discussed and reviewed, and then the IEP is produced after that meeting. This is the distinction that I mentioned before about IEP supports, which is specialized instruction and accommodations, and 504 plans, which are only accommodations. So for your child to receive supports either from the public school district that they're in, and that was something I didn't realize, that you can, let's say you live in Brookline, but the school is in Framingham. Framingham can provide those services, and there's some reciprocity. The focus point on the specialized instruction is that there's something that you're manipulating or doing with the content, the methods of teaching, or the performance criteria for your child. That's what makes it specialized. So the IEP is identifying your child's strengths, their current level of performance, and what accommodations they need in the classroom to be able to best learn. That could be moving the seat closer to the teacher who is instructing. That could be opportunities to get up and stretch and walk around the room if there is a diagnosis with ADHD. The curriculum itself can be altered, modified, expanded upon, reduced in content on a page. There may be related services. Your child has difficulty with articulation and would have some communication or pragmatics class. There are measurable goals and benchmarks. That is the sort of meat of the IEP, and saying, what is it that the classroom teacher or the special ed teacher is going to be working on with your son or daughter to help him or her achieve a goal. It may be to increase their phonetic skill. It may be to access graphic organizers to help with a writing piece, and that those graphic organizers, the child will have a choice of 3 or 4, and you'll figure out what is the best one for his or her writing style. In the service grid would be spelled out all of the services all of the types of services that will be provided for how much time over the course of a week. And you then identify, and this can be clarified by you, Sharon, at the day schools, are the students taking standardized tests?
Mm-hmm. They do a different kind. Usually they're not doing the MCAS, but many of them have their own version that they do.
But this also goes back to, if for any reason you are switching your child at any time into the public schools, you want to establish what kinds of accommodations or modifications are made to the testing setting, the way that your child takes the test. So that is important to get in there, even if those tests aren't going to be given per se at the school. And for 504 accommodation plan, we're talking about that everything in the learning environment in the classroom remains the same. However, the teacher may be doing some or more or one of these things, providing extended time for testing. That's often provided for students who have an indicated slower processing speed, preferential seating, digital books, sensory breaks, and the use of assistive technology.
Great. And just before we move on, again, in the Jewish day schools, most of the teachers will also take, place the accommodations from a 504 plan. Most of the Jewish day schools write up their own type of support plan and bring in all of those accommodations into it. And I guess one other thing too, just about the team meeting that I want to share is that you typically will have probably the director of support or one of the support people from your school attend these meetings. Sometimes one of your teachers will attend the meetings. And if Gateways is involved, we always, if available, we can join the meetings as well, if that's something that you would like. And if we're not able to join it because of scheduling, my staff typically write up some type of a summary to be able to be submitted in support of the needs. So that might happen sort of once you have an IEP and you have the review processes, which we'll talk through. But even if you're looking to start this process, your school might bring in one of the Gateway staff to do what we call kind of a quick look, and they can give some sort of recommendations to the teachers. But if there are some concerns, they can help be a help in this process as well.
Okay. Okay. So for the classroom placement options in the public school setting, if your child had a 504 plan developed, they would remain fully included in their class, in their regular classroom, and there wouldn't be any specialized instruction outside of the classroom necessarily. If your child is on an IEP, and I'm telling you this information, even though these categories don't really fit with your private school or day schools, but just to have, so you have that information. If your child has an IEP developed, part of the plan is placement is a page will determine the best classroom placement. And classroom options could include full inclusion, like a 504 accommodation plan, partial inclusion, so the student might come out and not be in a regular classroom for reading, but be with a specialized reading teacher because they're two grades below in reading or have some particular reading disability. A substantially separate classroom where the student would, in the public school, would be in that classroom for all of their courses. Different teachers may come in to teach the different classes, but they remain as a cohort together. And then, of course, for more outside of the public school setting programs, we have what we call 401s, which are programs that may be housed at a school, but they perform as a separate entity. They may have a wing of the school, for example. And then, of course, out of district placements. So I know in talking with Sharon that what we're looking at for majority of parents that may be looking at pursuing an IEP, that when we're talking about diagnostic categories, we're really looking at students with learning disabilities or a specific learning disability, or perhaps a health disability with ADHD. But as you can see, there is a continuum of services and supports that are generated from that IEP meeting, that team meeting. And of course, what I'm in talking about least restrictive environment, the goal is with the public school is to have your child in the public school be educated in the least restrictive environment. The goal is to be as included and as inclusive as possible, regardless of what the disability category is. Okay. Oh, I did want to also just, before I jump into this slide, when you're reviewing the IEP plan and the 504, some of the categories, there have been changes along with the changes from the Psychiatric Association in terms of the diagnostic manual, DSM-5, and we now don't say Asperger's. We say, and break it down to autism and Asperger's, but one of the specific diagnoses that can be identified is ASD, which is actually a developmental disorder, and that stands for autism spectrum disorder. You have specific learning, which could be math, reading, or writing. You have health, which is your attention deficit, ADHD or ADD, speech and language impairment, visual impairment, intellectual disability, which is those youngsters who are presenting with significant delays in a slew of cognitive areas, academic areas, traumatic brain injury, and multiple disabilities. So I wanted you to have a sense of what the categories would be when the IEP, when the eligibility determination is being made, that is. So you're sent this plan after the team meeting, and you want to review it with a fine-tooth comb. And you as a parent have a right to accept the plan fully, to partially reject it, or fully reject the proposed plan. Often when I was working with a parent who's partially rejecting, they were looking for a goal area that they felt was not inclusive enough, concrete enough, wasn't in depth enough. Maybe some of the wording in terms of the key evaluation summary that they were not comfortable with, the actual goals and objectives. And in the actual, on the page where the parent signature goes, you can actually write in or attach your comments to that page, and then it is sent back to the school district. If you don't agree with the plan, the team then will meet again to discuss revisions. We'll discuss what your concerns are. And then, and I'm not going to go into any details on this, but if an agreement cannot be reached, options are mediation or an appeal. And that could be 2 hours of explanation as to how to go about that. But there are many resources out there for you to be able to do that. Again, the IEP and the 504 plan is a roadmap for your child to navigate educational services that will meet their needs. Okay. Okay. So tracking progress and communicating concerns. I believe, Sharon, we may want to take this together. Because I know that in the public schools, there's a different set of progress reports and reporting out to parents that may look different in the day programs. So in a public school setting, you would, the IEP, typically the goals and objectives are addressed in a quarterly system. So every time there's a report card, there's also an IEP progress report generated. Every 3 years also is a new evaluation cycle. Your student is assessed again. You check off those assessments that you want done, and you meet again at that level, at the 3-year eval level. In between that time, you have annual team meetings where you're coming together once a year to generate a new IEP. And the point here with the goals and objectives is that if the goal and objective is written well enough, and that's always a challenge for all special ed teachers, is that you want to break down that goal and objective through the progress points so that they've met the goal in that year. So part of the challenge is to not write a goal that is so involved that your child is not going to be able to meet it, or that it is too simplistic and they are all of a sudden able to do this mathematical calculation because they got help with it for 3 or 4 weeks, and now it's moot and it's no longer a goal. So it's really key to develop the objectives so that you are working it through the different marking periods. And especially if it's a reading goal, that you're moving in the direction of task analysis and building on earlier skills to build up to stronger reading skills. If you're on a 504 plan, if your child's on a 504 plan, they will not receive any reports, but there will be an annual meeting to check on how he or she has been doing. What do you do with these progress reports? If your child is meeting their goals, that's great. What new goals could help them continue to learn? If your child isn't meeting their goals, why not? Are additional supports needed? And that's key. Now, they're not meeting the goal because there isn't enough infusion of support to meet that goal. Is the goal too much of a reach? And how do you communicate these concerns? I may want to defer to Sharon in terms of how you would look at this at the day school setting.
Sure. So just to back up a little bit, similar to what Karen was saying, we do, if your child is receiving their services through gateways, we do write progress reports in the middle of the year and at the end of the year. So similar timing with the report cards. So that's kind of, our version of those types of reports. And yes, when you have concerns, you can always reach out to the staff member themselves. You can always reach out to me as the director of the program. And I also work very closely with the support people at each of the schools. And so you can absolutely share any concerns with them as well, and they will share them with me. So any of those ways. And what I like to tell them and what I like to tell parents too is don't sit with any concerns. If you ever have them, speak up. We want to try and fix them. And if we don't know that you have a concern, we can't do anything about it. So it's always helpful when we hear, if there's anything that is unclear or that you're worried about. I definitely want to know. Great. So I'm just going to talk a teeny bit more about the service plan and how it differs. I got into it a little bit earlier, but basically sort of the very sort of nuts and bolts pieces of it. So with an IEP is covered through state funding. It's what's called an individual entitlement. So your child is entitled to get the entirety of their individual education plan, as it is written. And, again, if they're in the public school, they are mandated to get the entire thing. With Jewish day school students, they have the option to do some of the IEP in the public school if you'd like, and some of the services through a service plan at the day school. And so I'll kind of explain that a little bit further in a moment. And so, yeah, so as I said, the public school must deliver the services. For the service plan, that comes through federal funding. So again, that comes through the district where your school is physically located. And it's considered a group entitlement. So each child who has an IEP in that district generates some funding that comes into a whole pool. And then that pool is divided amongst the private schools in that district. And then through consultation with the district is divided amongst the students at the school. And so again, that's where you likely will not get all of your services because the funding unfortunately does not cover that. So typically we try to be really strategic so that there is, as I said, sort of it's done equally among students so that people get, an equal proportion of their services covered. And the number of students with IEPs is what determines the amount each year. So they do a count every year, which then determines the amount of funding for the next year. So the funding amounts change year to year, and it depends, as I said, sort of how much gets generated and then how many students there are across the district and across those private schools to split the funding amongst. We have a hope that one day all of IEP services can be covered within the private school. We think that that's in the best interest of the students. And so that's something that, we're continually working towards and advocating for, but we're definitely not there yet. Just another sort of piece about the service plan. So again, these come from the district where the school is located. In theory, that district is the one who is supposed to provide those services, but that district also has the option to contract out those services to a third-party provider who can provide those services within the day school. And so that's where, when we kind of discovered that this funding was available, which was really just about 7-ish years ago, the funding had always been available, but no one really knew, and none of the districts were in compliance around this. So once we discovered it, because Gateways had already been providing services in a lot of the schools went to their district and said, hey, we have this great relationship with Gateways. They already know our students. We already have a good system in place. Can you contract them as a third-party provider? So currently, we do work with many of the districts where the Jewish day schools are located. So we have contracts with Brookline, Boston, Framingham, Waltham, Newton, and I feel like I'm forgetting one. So most of the places where the Jewish day schools are located. And so that's how it's become that Gateways is able to provide a lot of those services. And so again, just to go back, let's say you have your child has 5 times a week reading support on their IEP. And let's say through the service plan, they're able to get that support twice a week. If you really wanted to, you could get the service plan, the twice a week within your day school. And then you could go to your public school for the other 3 times if you did want to. So we definitely do have some families that do some kind of combination. I think most stick to what they can get with the service plan, again, just because of the convenience factor, but you do have a right to do that. The service plan can never exceed what is on the IEP though. So it's always sort of some kind of portion of what is listed there. And someone had asked a question earlier too about the services Gateways provides in the school and if it's the same across all schools. And so the answer to that is that it's fairly similar, but not exactly the same. Every year at the end of the year, I work with the schools to project what the needs are going to be for the coming year. And that's basically how we determine what services are brought in. Several of the day schools have I would say all the day schools have learning specialists. Some of the schools have learning specialists that can also provide some additional support if you need sort of a multisensory reading program, something like Orton Gillingham or the Wilson program. Some of the schools have providers within the school that are able to do this work. So in those schools, typically they will just have Gateways come in to do speech and language services and occupational therapy services. Some other schools might bring in Gateway's learning specialists as well, possibly to do this reading support, or also if there are kids who really do need much more kind of targeted individual intervention that exceeds what the learning specialists within the school can provide. So it does differ a little bit, but we do, I always, again, tell people to reach out if they are looking for something that is not in a school and see if it's something that we can put in place. Next slide.
Before I go on, I did see the chats, and I wanted to just be able to answer the two questions that I saw that might. There was a question about living in a district where you are enrolled in a private school, had a neuropsych done. I believe it looks like it was done, but in the school. Okay, so do I request that? So if your day school is in one district, but you had the work done in the other, then if you live in that district, you can ask that district to honor the IEP that was written from the other district. It is transferable. Now, the school system that the district that you're now living in may say, well, we want to do some new assessments to look at because we may not agree with what was in the IEP, or we honor because you're 6 months in, and we'll hold a meeting at the end of the IEP period. So it all depends on what town you're in and what they want to honor from the other town. But you don't, if you have an IEP that was written and it has not expired, then that has to be honored, either through immediately getting some other testing done to take a look at whether or not you would change it, but definitely to try to meet the services that were indicated in the original IEP. I hope that makes sense. Ask more if I wasn't clear. And yes, independent eval is basically asking for a neuropsych testing. Typically, the testing that's done, the psychological testing done by the school psychologist, is thorough and well done, depending upon school systems that I worked in. But it doesn't do as many discrete and more intensive tests that may be needed to pull out when your child sort of is an enigma and doesn't sort of fit into a category of disability. And that's where neuropsych testing can be very helpful. So I hope I answered those questions. So I know that most of the Jewish day schools are a K-8. I don't know if there are any that are separated out, 6, 7, 8 per se, but like in a lot of K-8 public schools, you often see your 6th, 7th, and 8th graders as sort of standing, being in a sort of different standing, and maybe treated more like their middle school as they're transitioning to go to high school. So it's really important to note in the public schools that public schools make that distinction. Once your child turns 14, they are a part of the IEP process. They're invited to attend the IEP meetings, and they're seen now as moving into those young adult years where you are also working on that transition and planning that's going to take you middle school through high school. So there's a shift in middle schools in the day-to-day learning experience and environment, and a lot of 6th to 8th graders may see themselves as, well, we're the older students in the school, and you want to make sure that if there's a new set of teachers, or there's different teachers or different groupings in the upper grades, that there's a smooth transition with the teachers and the other support staff who may have known your child when they were younger, but now are handing off your child to another set of teachers. And of course, this may not be relevant for your schools, but identify and develop those early relationships with the middle school guidance counselor administrators. So it's this planning ahead for your child as they start to transition into those young adult years. Okay, next slide. Okay, well, I referred to this. So by law, for the IEP process, the transition, planning for transition and ending your high school years begins at age 14. Your child can still refuse to attend an IEP meeting, but they're strongly encouraged to. And you're starting to talk about some other skills along with the academic skills. You begin to look more intensively at social skills, daily living skills, self-advocacy and communication skills, being able to access resources in the community, teaching financial literacy and pre-vocational planning. So that's some of the shift that is, or I shouldn't even say it's a shift, but it's also just adding in additional teaching to address these transition skills.
And I think just before we move on, I think what's really powerful at this time is that it becomes a really important part of the process for your child to understand themselves as a learner. And it's very, when they're a part of this process, they also, they learn more about themselves and their profile, and also how best that they, how they can best advocate for themselves.
I would say, having been an academic support teacher in high school for many, many years, that if there's anything I wanted my students to be able to develop strongly was their self-advocacy. How they can approach a teacher when they don't understand what was assigned to them, how to advocate for more time, how to be able to discuss their learning style and educate their teacher as to what they need that would be helpful to them. So that's really important. That shift is really important. Okay, next slide. Okay. So of course, we have been talking about what you could access from the public school, the service plans within the day schools, and there's a lot of resources out there as well for you to access in the community. Not all of it free, of course, but some is. And so to start with, though, you want to make sure that you review any services that might be available through your health insurance. Might your health insurance pay for some speech and language and communication and pragmatics work? Based on your family financial situation, you might want to consider Mass Health as a secondary insurance for your child only, not for the parents, but for the child. I'm not going to go into details here, but you can check to see for financial support whether or not your child is eligible to apply for Social Security disability insurance, either through their parent. If they lost a parent, they might be able to get Social Security disability insurance upon the death of their parent. And also, if the family is low income, the child might be able to secure Social Security insurance, supplemental insurance. And again, you're looking into community programs that might be available, the Y, Boys and Girls Club, summer camps that might have a focus on inclusive activities for students with disabilities. There are many, many sports groups that now way beyond the Special Olympics that place an emphasis on inclusive training and activities to welcome students with a broad range of disabilities. It's really helpful to your child to broaden his or her experience whenever possible outside of the school day. And it also gives you a break if they are in an activity after school. Okay.
Great. So how can gateways be helpful to you? So like I've shared, we work very closely with all of the Boston area Jewish day schools. We work in different ways. Most of them we provide direct service in. There are a couple that we don't, but the majority we do. And even the ones that we don't, we partner in other ways, and we are there to consult, as needed. So if you don't know that we're in your school, you still can reach out, and I am still very connected with the heads of school, the learning support teams. And yes, I see a question about Marblehead. So we have not been going at this point to Marblehead, but I would be happy to talk more with you about that. because I do work a little bit with that school, and we sometimes can help to connect with some providers there. So as I said earlier, we provide these services, speech and language, occupational therapy, reading, academic support. We have some behavior consultation. We do social skills groups. As I said, if you go through the IEP process and you don't qualify for an IEP, Gateways, if we're in the school, can still provide some services. Typically that is, for an extra cost on top of your tuition. But we don't bill insurance directly, but we are able to reimburse. So what we typically do with families is have them call their insurance companies and find out if they would reimburse for speech and language services or occupational therapy services that are taking place in the day school. We definitely have had a lot of success, but it's very inconsistent as to which insurance companies do cover and which don't. And I still have not been able to say, in general that, Blue Cross Blue Shield does, because it is so specific to the different plans. But I always tell people to ask, because if they will cover it the way they would if you were to go to an outpatient clinic after school, because that's really sort of what the services would be like, since it isn't through the IEP. We can provide you with a statement of the services for you to submit for reimbursement. So you would still pay up front, but then you would get reimbursed for the services. As I said, I work very closely with the directors of support and the different learning specialists in the schools and the leadership at the schools. So you can always contact them if you have questions about Gateways. But we are also going to share our contact information at the end as well. And I'm always available. I talk to parents all the time about, any questions that they have, because I do really want to be as helpful as I can. So yeah, I think that's it for now. Next slide.
Okay. So how can Jewish Family and Children's Services help? So myself and my colleague, Joan Munnelly, we are the two DLS, Disability Lifespan Solution Advocates. And we usually receive our referrals through our Disability Resource Network hotline, or in this situation, you will have my number listed in another slide. And parents reach out, and usually we start with an initial consultation, sharing what the concerns are and where you are in the process of looking at getting supports for your child, whether special needs have been identified or not. As an advocate, I work with school systems. I work with Department of Developmental Services, Department of Mental Health. I do research. I do helping parents connect to outside resources. I sit in on meetings, team meetings. I help connect parents with a whole array of services. And I go the 9 yards. I'm working with a family with an adult daughter to an appeal. She's been denied Department of Developmental Services, and we're appealed to the commissioner to address the denial. So there's a lot of ways that Joan and I help families. Joan will do observations at the school. Like I said, we sit in on team meetings, and we try to connect with your son and daughter and meet them and know who they are. So they're not just somebody that we're talking about. Older kids can be in meeting, can actually attend the Zooms, but if they're younger, we try to at least observe in the school setting or see them in a meeting at our offices. So that's just some examples of ways that we can help you. Okay, so as soon as you think there may be a concern, start asking for help. At the day school, check in with the teachers that work with your son or daughter, ask them what they're observing. Or if there's something you're noticing, ask them to begin observing to see if that's something that they may be noticing too. Know that there is a wide variety of services available to you and your child. Not all of them are free, but you can keep digging until you find the services that might work for you and your family. Pursuing an educational plan. Plans help maximize the supports for your child, and they help to track the progress. And as a navigator, as an advocate, you are your child's best advocate. But Gateways, DLS, we're here to help you with that process. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Sharon, on that. I think we
Sharon, you're
lost.
muted.
We lost your voice.
I'm so sorry. The one thing that I want to say is that the faculty at the schools care so much about your kids, and they want to partner with you. And I think, you know, as open and transparent as you can all be with the schools about concerns you have or needs that you're seeing, will just be so helpful for your child, because at the end of the day, you know, you want your child to succeed, but the schools do too. And so, you know, when everyone works together, it's really, you know, what's best for the child. So I think, you know, we were trying to cover most of the questions throughout, but if we didn't get any, if we didn't answer any of them, please feel free to put them in the chat, or if you do want to unmute, you can ask a question. Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.
And here, of course, is our contact information. So please, you know, as I said, I will send this out to all of you who registered, so that you will have it and can reach out to either of us.
Okay.
Hey, sorry, quick question. Do we have to get an IEP on our own through the Boston Public Schools? Would it be through the school?
Say
So
it again.
yeah, so I think the question was if you have to actually go to the public school to get it, or if you can do it through the day school. So if that was correct, yes. So you do have to go to the public school. The day school can help you if you do need assistance, but you do have to go to the public school to initiate the process, and that is where the testing takes place, and all of those pieces that Karen went through.
So what's the process at the beginning of the process? Just search Boston Public School IEP? Or?
Sure.
So-
And if you, I can send you, we had referred to a document earlier that we have, and I can send that to you. And so it should have a link directly to the page, you know, the web page of who to call and contact, so that you can get the process started.
Thank you.
I ask a question. Is it standard that I kind of got caught in this last year, and now we're in a different district, but is it standard, or was it just the school district that I was in that no IEP evaluations are done over the summer? And otherwise that clock is like stopped and doesn't kick back in until the school year begins?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The teachers and psychologists, they don't work a 12-month year. So public schools are 10 months. Administrators work longer, but they're not the ones that are doing the evaluations. Yeah. So if you request an evaluation late in the school year, they will tell you they don't have enough time. So having worked in the Boston schools and the Newton schools with the number of requests for evaluation, or the ongoing 3-year evals that are coming up, it's really best to get in there right at the beginning of the school year. And of course, anytime afterwards, but if you want sooner than later, you have concerns, get in there right when the school's open, and get to the office and ask for the consent form.
And
Right.
despite the fact that it's a state funded thing, right? It's not transferable to different districts? In other words, your clock has to keep starting over if you were to move, or do they have to honor the original?
Evaluation, no, the clock starts over. So in other words, you requested an evaluation. It didn't get done because you moved into a different district?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, right. So that school district doesn't honor, if there was an IEP, yes, they would honor the IEP and work with it and maybe do some new testing. But if nothing got started in the other school district, you are starting all over. That's correct.
Okay.
Great. And I did see a question if Gateways is not in your school. I would definitely, so first of all, you can feel free to reach out to me after this and we can talk about the specific situation. Most the schools that we're not in, most of them have other either other providers coming in or connections with some other organizations, or have some of the staff in-house themselves. So I'd be happy to, talk tomorrow if you want to follow up specifically about your school. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you
Okay.
all so much. We appreciate you taking the time with us tonight and hope that this was helpful. And again, like we've said a few times, feel free to reach out because we really are here to help in any way that we can.
And thank you. I really appreciate having done this collaboration with you, Sharon. So
Me
don't
too.
hesitate to reach out to me as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.